Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're all here ready for our keynote speaker on day 3 of our All Systems Go, Taking Action Together, System of Care Virtual Summit 2024. Thank you for being here. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this fantastic keynote that we have in store for you. Echoes of a Journey, Navigating Youth and Young Adult Crisis Services, Yesteryears to Today. And our fantastic speaker today is Vanessa Williams, who is a state-certified peer and recovery support specialist. She is currently the board secretary for the National Association of Peer Supporters. Vanessa is the chief executive officer and founder of Elevate Recovery. Elevate Recovery is a consulting company that assists organizations and individuals in leveraging diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in their workplace through professional development, training to increase productivity, create an engaged work culture, and increase employee retention. We're so thrilled to have her here today. Before I pass it over to her, I just want to remind you all to please put your question in the question and answer function versus in the chat. You can also vote on questions in the Q&A function in your bar on the right of your screen. We will not be using the raise your hand function for questions today, so please remember to put them in the Q&A. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Vanessa, so you can take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Hi, everyone. As was said, thank you, Lozelle. My name is Vanessa Williams. I am a certified peer recovery support specialist. I do want to make a little amendment because when I sent the information in, I was the board secretary. I'm now the board president for the National Association of Peer Supporters. But yeah, not a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like was already said, I am a certified peer recovery support specialist. I'm also a certified diversity professional. I'm board president for NAPS, and I started my own company because, yeah, that happens. So there are some things I'm going to be sharing parts of my journey that were definitely traumatic for me, and they may be traumatic for some of you. With that being said, please know your limits. Please be more than willing to step away if your emotional state it gets too uncomfortable. Take a break. Do what you need to do so you're safe. While I can't always, we want to make sure that we have a safe space. I mean, safe for who, right? So make sure that you're safe and you're supported in your space, wherever that may be. Might help if I put it up there. Yeah, know your limits. Create a safe space. If you practice grounding techniques, this will be a great, there may be times during my speech where you might need to do that. So please feel free. Please make sure that you are engaging in self-care activities both during and after this presentation. And if you really need to, please reach out for support. I do know that Intact has created a wonderful platform where people can reach out and they can get the support they need. And with that, I will be covering a few things. Youth crisis, young adult crisis, crisis services, getting better, and then creating community. So, with me telling you part of my journey, here we go. I was born to parents who were addicted to heroin. So, as what can happen, I wound up in foster care as a toddler. I was around 15 months. I was one of the lucky ones. I was able to get a foster home right away. But I felt out of place as a child. I always looked outside, wondering when the aliens were going to come and take me away, or just anybody. During my childhood, I had a lot of trauma. Growing up in a Black household with parents, foster parents, who were the same age as my friends' grandparents, I got a lot of, I treated a lot differently than my friends did. My parents were much older. My mother and father were both born during the Depression. So you can imagine the type of mentality they had and the things they had to overcome in their own lives. Unfortunately, my adoptive father, because I eventually was adopted, created even more trauma for me. And I won't go into details on that. I think you can kind of piece that together on your own. Because of that, I began drinking at an early age. It was consistent by the time I was 12 and 13. I was actually taking homemade wine to school in my Scooby-Doo thermos. Yes, I'm that old. I have a Scooby-Doo lunchbox, and my Scooby-Doo thermos did not have chicken noodle soup in it. It just didn't. The first time I attempted to overdose was at the age 13. My mother was sick a lot. She had heart problems and diabetes and just everything you can imagine. So she had a ton of medications, and I would give her medications. So I knew the medications that slowed down her heart and when she was having issues, and then I knew the ones that would speed up her heart if she was having those issues. Unfortunately, I never could remember the names, and I got them mixed up. So I didn't know which ones to take, so I took them both. And so what happened was, of course, I wound up in a psychiatric hospital. And that first hospitalization for me, I grew up in Chicago. So just give us a little background. I grew up in Chicago. So the first hospitalization was at a hospital on the southwest suburbs. It was not one that was frequented by Black people a lot. So being in that hospital was kind of a culture shock in a lot of ways. So I'm in there with a lot of white teenagers, kids my age, that for some reason, same thing, suicide attempts. One of the things that stuck out for me during that time was I couldn't comb my hair. I was there for a week and I couldn't comb my hair. My parents were of the mindset that Black people don't commit suicide, and it must have been something else. So I ended up, when they came to visit me one time, and I pretty much was told by my parents not to tell the doctors anything or I would ruin my life. That if I told them, that I need to tell them that I did it to get attention because my parents wouldn't buy me an outfit. Okay. Yeah. And that's what I told them. I did talk to my roommate, who was really nice girl. She actually helped me comb my hair because, you get those little combs, and it wasn't going through my thick hair. And I told her that my parents told me not to tell the doctor what was going on. And she was like, well, you don't. If you tell them what's going on, you'll be in here a long time, like I've been. And she had been in there for almost 6 weeks. She was like, if you tell them what happened, what's really going on with you, you're stuck and you'll never get out. And I'm like, oh crap. So I learned with that first hospitalization, one, that I can't tell doctors or any staff the truth. And if I tell the truth, I will be held indefinitely. So from there, the lies start, and they also continue. I want to take a little bit of time to reflect on the things that I've shared. there was a lot of things going on with me at that time. Like I said, I was being abused. My mother didn't know. I was told that if I told my mother what was going on, she would die. She would have a heart attack and she would die, and they wouldn't. And then I'd have to go into foster care, and nobody would want me because I'm too old, and therefore I'd probably wind up on the street and get beat up all the time by just all of that in my young mind. I'm saying these things because we have to realize when we're providing services for people that these things are real and these things happen. And a lot of the behaviors we see in the people we serve are due to trauma that they've experienced in the past. I had to learn to navigate the world as a Black woman who could not trust authority figures. Everyone in my life who was an authority figure had harmed me in some way as a youth. And it continued to yesterday, right? I watched a movie. It was bad. Anyway, so there was a lot of hopelessness. I didn't feel safe. There was a lot of guilt and shame. Was it my fault that this was happening? What did I do? Was this happening to my friends? Is this normal? And I'm seeing things on TV that's saying that it isn't normal for these things to happen. But the truth is, there's a lot of things that happen on TV that they say are normal that isn't. Like the Brady Bunch. That wasn't normal for me. So what do I believe? Who do I talk to? I really didn't. I didn't talk to anyone. I shared a snippet of things every now and then, but I didn't really get the support that I needed from anyone my age when I would share it. Matter of fact, a lot of times it would be used against me. So the dark thoughts continued and hovered and led to a lot more stuff. So when we think about crisis and youth and the concerns that they have and we should have as people who provide services, we need to be aware, we need to be cognizant that stigma is so there. And it's not just stigma from the outside world, it's self-stigma, the shame and embarrassment, and not just only the judgment of others, but how I actually and others judge ourselves. We all judge ourselves. A lot of my judgment wasn't from other people. It was how I was internalizing me, and I felt I was being judged. But that I don't even know, because everything was so personal. Everything was so emotional. Other concerns are awareness. There are times when, as a youth, they may not recognize the symptoms and the signs. And I know that we have this thing where we think everyone has access. Well, you know, these kids today, they have access to the internet. They have access to social media. Not everyone has access to social media or the internet. We learned that during the pandemic, didn't we? There are people who don't have access. So if they don't have the ability to go on TikTok and find out what these signs and symptoms are, and they don't go in areas where there are people who are receiving services that they can talk to, how do they know? How do they know? By a billboard? I'm not sure. Then there are the cultural norms. Not everyone will see, not everyone believes that mental illness is a thing. I grew up in a home where mental illness was, no, that doesn't happen to Black people. Black people are resilient. We're strong. We survived slavery. We survived this. We survived that. There's no way that you have a mental illness. You're just trying to get attention. You're just trying to be this. You're trying to be extra, that's what I heard growing up. Then there's the confidentiality issue. How confidential are our services for youth and young adults if we are bound to go tell their parents what was said? Even just little snippets and even generalizations can lead parents down a rabbit hole. And a lot of times parents, not because they're bad parents, but because they don't want to be judged as being bad parents, start covering things up, start saying, oh, no. And that's not the reality. One of the main takeaways that I got from my childhood is this statement: What goes on in this house stays in this house. And that wasn't a statement. It was more of a threat. You don't go telling people outside of our home what's going on in our home. Then there's trust. A lot of times I couldn't trust people. I definitely didn't trust people who were adults. And I definitely didn't have a good time trusting men or boys my age at the time. Then there was always the consequences. If I don't do certain things, if I don't behave in a certain way, if I don't do what my parents tell me to do, or in this case, my father, if I didn't do what he wanted, then what would happen? Oh, okay, yeah, if I don't do it, then my mom is going to die and I'm going to wind up on the streets. So I'm going to take a breath, y'all. Feel free to take a breath with me. I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay, young adulthood. I had a major breakdown at the age of 19. I had my daughter. I had just had my oldest daughter. And I don't know if there was postpartum. The whole thing, postpartum depression and all that. I'm not sure what it was. But I don't even really remember the straw that broke the camel's back. All I know is I snapped. My mother not knowing what to do. My dad was at work. She called the police. I was hiding in the garage in my dad's car, which was a 77 Pontiac something. All I know is you could fit two people in the back seat comfortably, laying down. It was a big car, one of those cars. And I tried to hide there, but the police found me, as they are apt to do. And they took me to Tinley Park Mental Institution. And I don't know how many people are aware of Tinley Park. Yeah, it was that long ago. The Tinley Park is still open. That is not a place where you really want to be. I was scared out of my mind. And I was there for like 3 hours. They sent me home. I guess I should be grateful. They gave me a bus card or a token and told me where the bus stop was because I had no idea where I was. I had to take the bus home. I didn't get any medication, no follow-up. So I began self-medicating between the alcohol and the drugs. And I would tell you that my drug use pretty much centered around crack cocaine. But being honest, I am an equal opportunity drug user, or was. I did not discriminate. If it was there and it was available, I'd be willing to do it. Unfortunately, that led to extreme thoughts, extreme behaviors. I am here to tell you that I did give birth to two children that should have been addicted to crack, but they were not. However, I did have one son who passed away at 5 months. That threw me into a major tailspin. My mental health truly deteriorated at that time. I had so many breakdowns that summer. This occurred in April of 94. And between April and August, I was probably hospitalized at least 6 times. One particular time, I was in the hospital. I found out I was pregnant. I found out I was pregnant when I got admitted to the hospital. I was married at this point. And as a young adult in the hospital psych ward, I got to see some things from a different perspective because I was not on medications like everyone else. One night I woke up just out of nowhere and I noticed a man in my room. I had a female roommate and I noticed a man like hovering over her and I didn't know what to do. I kind of froze. I just laid there with my eyes open, staring at what was taking place. The next day, I told her what I saw. We went to the head nurse. to talk to her, to tell her what I saw. And the first thing out of the nurse's mouth was, "Are you sure you saw what you saw? Because, you know, you are on medication." And me being me, no, I'm not. Remember, I'm pregnant. I am the one person in this place that's not over medicated. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. The next thing you know, two big guys came in, dragged me out of my chair, hit me with a needle. And I don't know. I woke up 3 days later, strapped to a bed, got the, the whole restraints going on, and a catheter. What the heck? What happened? And I'm like, how long? What day is it? And when they told me what day it was, I realized I had been out for 3 days. I do not know what they did to me while I was out. I do not know. I don't know. I don't even know what they shot me up with. Probably out of it. Anyway. After getting out of that hospital, I vowed I would never go to another hospital again. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I ended up moving to Southern Illinois, East St. Louis to be exact, and wound up in more hospitals down there. Going to take a moment to reflect on that. There were a lot of system failures. I never got any follow-up support. For the most part, when I left the hospital, I would leave the hospital sometimes with a couple of bottles of medication and nothing else. I was really confused by the attitude of the nurse and how she treated me, because why wouldn't you believe me when I'm not on medications? Of course I saw what I saw, but they're crazy, so therefore can't be believed, which is also, we can't afford to have any incidents. But I didn't realize it from that perspective either. And the truth is, I felt betrayed. The one thing I forgot to share is that these are the same nurses that asked me during my hospitalization to translate for them. There was a young man who was also a patient who had been diagnosed with HIV, but he was also deaf and he used sign language. Now, I only know the alphabet. And he could write everything to them, but they didn't want to wait for him to respond by writing down his answers or his questions. So they asked me to interpret. Y'all hospital, you should have an interpreter. Why am I doing this? I'm like, you all do know I only know the alphabet. And that's because they saw me talking to him, because I had, I knew some sign language, not a lot, but enough. So that was another failure. I should not, as a patient, should not be doing that. But anyway, as a personal reflection, looking at all of these different failures of the system, it is no wonder why I didn't want to be a part of that system. And it's no wonder why people who have experienced even a fraction of what I experienced, or even worse, want to come to us, and I will use us, the collective us, for services. They've been abused, they have been neglected, and they've been failed by the very systems that are in place that are supposed to be designed to protect us and to keep us from harming ourselves and others. And yet, we're expecting people to behave in a certain way, or we won't give them services. Coercion. Let's continue. When it comes to crisis services and young adult concerns, they seem to really match, right? They seem to match youth. Stigma, denial. Because now I'm old enough to understand what denial is. Those cultural norms are still there. Confidentiality, trust, the consequences. What happens if I go in the hospital? Will I lose my job? If they keep me for 2 weeks or even a week, how am I supposed to keep my job? How do I pay my rent? How do I do these things? So we need to step back and think about how the decisions we're making as part of the system it seems like it's supposed to be safe, but they're actually causing more harm. If when I get out of the hospital, I no longer have a roof over my head just because I needed to get better, well, there's no wonder why I waited so long to go to the hospital, because I had to keep a roof over my head. And of course, there's children involved. So I have a couple of quotes. What happens when people open their hearts? They get better. It took a long time for me to get to that point. I didn't find recovery until I was 40 years old because I felt so damaged by the experiences I had with crisis services. The other quote, your sadness does not make you less of a human being. In fact, it makes you more expansive, more connected, painfully beautiful, raw, open, completely alive. I can share my story now and feel how that story can transform others, can maybe even transform some of the systems that we still have in place. So there are different crisis models. You know what? Let's take a break. I'm sure there are questions. This would be a great place to take a couple of questions if we have any.
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa. You are resonating with our audience. They have a lot of questions. So let's just take a couple right now.
Okay.
I am going to pop one up on the stage. Do you think if there were more dialogues about suicide to minorities, that you would have had a different outcome?
That's a good question. I'm a product of, so take my glasses off. I was born in 1969. It was a very good year. Back in the 70s and early 80s, suicide wasn't even talked about in white families that much, right? So I don't, in my case, from my childhood, I don't think that it would have been that big of a difference. My parents, my mother, I'll be specific. My mother was one that, church, even though she didn't go, everything was really, church stuff. It was like, it's a demon, blah, blah, blah. You just need to go to church more often. You don't even go to church. Well, she didn't have any problems. And that's, so I'm like, you don't go to church. But if I look at that answer, if I answer that question as in today, yes, I do believe that children, youth, and young adults, and adults, for that matter, everyone, would have different outcomes if there were more dialogues about suicide, about depression, about bipolar, about all of it. We don't talk about it because we don't want others to think we're defective. And we definitely don't want others to think our children aren't perfect and sweet. Not my baby, right? So yeah, thank you for your question. There definitely needs to be more dialogue in minoritized populations.
Thank you. We have another question from early in your life. How can we protect kids from the traumatizing effects of being hospitalized while maintaining safety?
I'm going to answer that question, Lauren, with a question. Safety for whom? Who's safe? As providers or behavioral health workers, when we talk about safety, we talk about safety, but we're not talking about the safety of the so-called client or the people we serve. We're talking about our safety. So my question is, whose safety? If we're talking about the safety of the individual, then, well, that starts with listening to the individual and seeing what their needs really are. And then you can determine what safety measures are necessary. If I'm coming into a hospital and I have and I'm coming in because of a suicide attempt. You really think taking my shoelaces away is going to make it, it's going to change anything? You think taking my belt so my pants won't stay up is going to make it better? I understand the need for some safety measures. I really do. But when you take away, and I say this, and I say this because I've seen this in the hospital where they took a man's belt away, but he had his clothes, but his clothes were too big. So all he did was spend all his time sitting down. He couldn't take part in any recreational activities because his pants were too big and they were falling down, and nobody ever bothered finding something that he could wear that fit. So if we're talking about safety, we need to talk about safety in a way that still gives people dignity, hope, and some type of empowerment. Because if I feel powerless and hopelessness, what's going to make me feel hopeful and empowered? Definitely a belt so my pants ain't falling down and everybody can see all my goodies. No, nobody needs to see the cookies in the jar. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Do you want to take one more or keep going?
I'll take one more.
One more? Okay. Let me see. As you mentioned your experience with your family's perception of suicide as a person of color, how would you recommend approaching the conversation of suicidality in the context of race with clients, friends, and family, etc.?
So it's a great question. One thing to remember is that no race or ethnicity are monoliths. So it would depend on who I'm speaking with, and I want to get to know the person. I want to get to know the family. I want to get to know the individual I'm speaking with. I'm a peer first, so I'm doing more listening and talking, except for now, because, but understanding that it's with minority and different cultures, we definitely want to be aware of certain nuances, but not everyone was raised the same way. I was raised in the middle. Look, I grew up in Chicago, and you may have made assumptions. I grew up in a middle-class home, a house, 3 bedrooms. I was the only child. I had a full basement to myself. I had every toy I could want. And I grew up poor, and I grew up in the ghetto, or the so-called ghetto, and I grew up in the projects. So a lot of my experiences are rooted in a middle-class lifestyle. And I know people who were not raised in that environment who have similar experiences, but that's a different nuance. So learning to sit back and stripping away all of what you think you know because of a few words, Chicago, South Side, and listening to people, and then making a connection with them through something, whatever you can connect to them with, and then finding ways to bridge that connection to providing better and more clear services that will actually be beneficial to that specific individual and their families.
Thank you. That was a fantastic answer. Thank you for all your knowledge. You want to keep going forward with the presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for such great questions. So there are different things that different crisis models. There's the lovely 988, right? We all know 988 now, or maybe we all don't. Let me not say there goes that all or nothing. Step away from even I make mistakes. Stepping away from the all or nothing. There are a lot of people who know about 988 now. We see it plastered on billboards. We see it everywhere we go, right? Dial 988 if you're having these thoughts, or if you need to reach out for help, mental health or addiction or whatever. Then there's crisis lines, which can handle suicide, suicidal, homicidal stuff, or they can handle whatever a person deems as a crisis. In this case of a crisis line, the individual gets to decide what the crisis is, and the crisis worker gets to try to help navigate them through it. Then there are warm lines. Warm lines are normally staffed by peer specialists or people with lived and or living experience. I say that because there are warm lines that are for LGBTQ. There's warm lines for breastfeeding mothers, cancer survivors. There's warm lines for all sorts of things. And for me to just say peer specialist would be kind of inaccurate because it's for people who have lived or living experience in whatever that warm line's mission and purpose and values are for. So I personally have 13 years of working on a warm line. I worked, supervised, managed a warm line. Yeah. And our warm line was situated right next to a crisis line. So I got to hear a lot of crisis workers do their thing. Every job has great and bad employees, right? Anyway. Other crisis models are hospitals. They might have a psychiatric unit. I know some hospitals now will ship you to another hospital for that. That happened to me when I lived in Arizona. Then there are peer respites. I think those aren't as widespread as they should be. There are a lot of times when I believe that a peer respite would have been better, a place where I could have just gone and kind of talked about my stuff with someone who could understand, who'd been through it, and then kind of just taking the space to just chill out for a couple of days or so. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked in the chat. Yes, yes, Sandra, East St. Louis. Yeah, I lived there for 6 years, and then I had a very bad experience in Belleville. I don't want to talk about it. So I'm very transparent. I don't want to talk about Belleville. That's too traumatic. But yeah. So, I lost my own place. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. So, other crisis service models include mobile crisis units. That's when a mobile team comes to the individual who's experiencing a crisis situation. Sometimes those mobile teams may be all peer support specialists, and sometimes there might just be one. Usually there is a clinician in case, things get escalated, but there are stabilization centers where individuals can receive short-term community-based support. Once again, warm lines. I will always talk about warm lines as being a good place for people to start. And I know I've mentioned it twice. That's because I love a warm line. So with warm lines, if you are a person who is providing services for individuals in the behavioral health field, or even people who are experiencing homelessness, or even people who may be diagnosed with something, a warm line is a great tool to help build a connection. It can really help. If I had known about a warm line back in my teenage years, I think things would have turned out different. I just never felt like I could connect with people. None of my friends had a diagnosis. None of my friends understood. If I would have been able to talk to somebody that really, really had been there and done that and had found their way out of the darkness, I don't think my story would have continued. I wouldn't have had a 40-year journey. I might have had just a, 10-year journey. But being able to reach out and pick up a phone and just talk to a person who I may never, ever see. If I do, they won't know it's me because it's a phone call, right? That would have been so much better for me. Instead, there was a time when I did call a crisis line. And the only thing I remember from that call is, and I know in my heart, because I've had jobs at call centers, I get it, that they have to ask certain questions. But the one question that stuck out to me was, are you high right now? What are you talking to? Of course I am. I'm on the street. I don't have a job. I'm experiencing homelessness. Yeah, I do that just so I can forget where I'm at for 30 seconds. So yeah, am I not going to be able to receive services because of that? Well, it's going to change what we can provide for you. Oh, okay. All right. It's not that the question had to be asked, because it does. It's a question that has to be asked. It's how it's asked. When it's asked in a way that sounds nasty and like I'm a loser, which, believe me, through all my drug use, I knew that. That is why I continue to use, because I was a loser. Loser rhymes with user. At least that was the mentality I had back then. It is my hope and dream for those of you here who say my story resonates with you, take this story back and incorporate it into the work you do, incorporate it into the tone you carry when you're speaking to even the most challenging individual that you are serving. I would also have a personal plea that we try to stop using the term client, because that denotes a power dynamic. Try using the people you serve, the person you are serving, because you are providing a service. It can help your mindset be more empathetic instead of apathetic. Because I heard a lot of apathy when I was sitting on the warm line listening to crisis workers. Crisis workers who were wonderful people, but they were burnt out. And instead of giving them time off, they were told to keep taking those calls. And I like customer better, consumer. But I think when we use the term people we serve, it puts us in a different level, right? When we place ourselves above another person, even just a little bit, or act as though it's transactional, it takes away just a little piece of humanity. Customer is a very, very transactional thing. You're here, and then when you leave, we're done. But that's not true when it comes to mental health or any substance use services. They're never really gone, are they? Come on. We've all had that one person we've served that never really leaves us, right? That somehow they are still in our heart, and we still hope that even though we haven't seen them in years, that they're okay, that they're doing fine, that they found some piece of recovery, or at least some peace. So customer, while much better than client, still has a transactional feel to me. And that's just me. The opinions I voice are mine and mine alone. Okay. Where am I at? Okay. So once again, we have some quotes. So this would be a great time to stop for questions.
Thank you. Okay, we have so many questions. How would you recommend, let me show it on stage. How would you recommend navigating a situation where you feel that an individual isn't being open and you want to help them to open up in a clinical setting?
If you feel that someone isn't being open, then one, you're making an assumption, and two, you're trying to fix it. I say stop to both. Stop trying to fix it and allow it to happen organically. It may take one or more sessions before a person is comfortable enough to trust you. And then that doesn't really mean they'll ever open up fully. It could be a cultural thing. It could be a personal thing. Like my story, I still have trust issues. So finding a way to have conversations that aren't necessarily about services, just getting to know the person as a person. They may never have had anyone who wanted to get to know them, whoever they may feel they are, even in that moment. So taking the time to build a connection and being willing to not have that opening up immediately. It might take some time, and being willing to be there for the long haul. And learning to listen to what people say and what people don't say, and then what that silence in between really means. Okay, how can minorities be supported to embrace their culture communities and help stop this cycle. Ooh, okay, that's deep. Okay, so first of all, I believe wholeheartedly it really starts with having people that minoritized populations can go to who look like themselves. I think it also helps to have people, Black and brown people, in higher positions. It is not okay to just have a bunch of Black people and brown people and people of color at the bottom of the totem pole in organizations. If Black and brown people aren't in the C-suite or in the boardroom, then services will never be completely able to function for all communities. Because if there's no representative that looks like me, how in the executive suite where organizational strategic plans are being made and what programs are going to be added, if they're not in that room to make those decisions, then who are you making decisions for? You're going to make decisions for the status quo. And I don't mean that to just be white people, but just the status quo. You have to make sure that you have, and this is where I'm going to go with my DEI stuff, has to be embedded throughout the organization. It's a top down, not a bottom up. No way does that happen. So if you want to support minoritized communities, you want to put minoritized communities in positions of authority in like I said, in the C-suite, in the boardroom, making sure that they can, because all the communities are different, once again, not a monolith. So in order to be able to have these conversations, in order to be able to create services that are actually helpful for people, you need to have people who are willing to go out in the community, and they need to look like the community, right? And not just the pandering stuff where, oh, we have a Black manager, we'll send them out. No. I hope I answered that question. Other ways you can support minoritized populations when it comes to behavioral health services is by just listening and being willing to understand that they're probably going to bring up some stuff that you don't get. You may not get why I am scared to leave my house because, you know, I watched one too many videos of a Black man being shot by the police. You may not understand how that has scarred me and how I'm scared. I'm petrified. I'm petrified of getting in the car. Heck, I'm petrified of being on the bus. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. One more question, or do you want to?
One more question is fine.
18 minutes. Okay. How would you suggest we begin building trust without overstepping boundaries or imposing on them?
It goes back to connection. And when somebody tells you that you've overstepped the boundaries, stop. Don't come up with excuses for why you did it. One of the things that I've noticed is, it's never, and this is like and this is going back to like microaggressions. It's never really the microaggressions. That's not saying it's not never. One are all thinking sorry. It's sometimes it's not so much the microaggression that took place. A lot of times it's when I say something and I get dumped on about how I'm not racist, blah blah blah. I'm not a bad person. Okay, first of all, racism, doing racist acts, especially if they're unknowingly, does not mean that you're a bad person. There are things that I have said in my life that I know now aren't okay for other minoritized populations. That has nothing to do with being a good or bad person. You just made a mistake. And I don't want to paraphrase that song, but mistakes can happen to anyone. It's being willing to shut up, listen to why it was wrong, or why they don't trust you, or why they felt their boundaries were violated, and saying, I hear you, and I'll try to make sure I do not do that again. And that's it. Stop. Unless they want to continue talking about it. But we have to resist the need to overshare and stumble over ourselves trying to tell people how we're not bad and how, you know, it isn't that, but just taking the time to own it. Thank you, Catherine. Own it, live with it, and just say, okay, I learned something. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. That's what I got.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. You can take it back to your presentation now.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay. So I think I might make it through on my slideshow. What? Okay, so creating community. This is a double-edged sword when we talk about resilience. We want to celebrate resilience in youth and young adult crisis services. It helps. I want to word this in a way that causes no harm. So resilience is very important. We have to build resilience. However, we have to be careful with that term. As a Black woman, if another person tells me how resilient I am or how strong I am, I might just not be very good with that. There are a lot of stereotype tropes out there. One is the strong Black woman, which means that I can't ever be fragile or I can't ever show any type of weakness. And so we have to be very careful when we do that. When we say, oh, but you're so resilient. Why should I have to be resilient 24/7? I feel like I spend 99.999% of my life being resilient in the face of others' ignorance and intolerance. The same can be said for youth and young adult. We celebrate resilience, but then we ignore all of the baggage that created the need to be resilient. So yes, let's celebrate it, but then let's go back and say, hey, I'm so proud that you are resilient, you bounce back. But let's, what else do we need to do? Or do we need to talk about what's going on? I love that. Is resilient, are you saying that they're strong and resilient because you don't have to deal with the issue anymore? Or are you saying they're strong and resilient because they're really strong and resilient? And if so, if they have a moment where they're emotional or weak, how are you going to approach them? You definitely aren't going to approach them by saying, hey, why aren't you being resilient right now? And I actually had this happen to me in a workplace where I actually broke down and started crying. Why are you crying? You're always so strong. I don't expect this type of behavior from you. Wait, what? Okay, but when my white counterpart was crying last week, you took her in the office and y'all had a 3-hour conversation. I bet it didn't include any of this anything you're saying to me. And this was in front of HR, y'all. Anyway. So we talk about youth and young adult resilience. How can we support that resilience and while still amplifying their voice? Well, we can offer peer services. There are youth and young adult peer support workers out there. Whoop, whoop. There are also people like myself who are trained to do youth and young adult peer support. We want to make sure it's strengths focused. We want to focus on what people can do. We have to move away from this deficit thing we have where everything is about we need to fix what's broken. I ain't broken. I'm not a toy. Do I look like a Barbie doll? My arm isn't over there and my foot over there. I'm not broken. I'm just cracked in a couple of spots. That's it. I'm beautifully imperfect, and that's okay. Focus on people's strengths. Focus on what they can do, because I can tell you, as a person who spent 40 years just barely existing in this world, I had forgotten all the things I enjoyed. If somebody would have asked me what I enjoyed doing before all of the madness crept into my life, I would have said, I love dancing. I love going down in the basement, putting on my disco records and some Earth, Wind, and Fire, but also some Led Zeppelin because I'm well-rounded. And just dancing and dancing and dancing. Allow people the space to self-respect, allow people the space to have self-respect, but also allow them to self-reflect upon their lives. I've never really been good at self-reflection until my PhD program, where you got to do a lot of that. Like, you end up self-reflecting, why am I even doing this? But anyway, make sure we provide positive feedback for people. And this is not just, and as much as this presentation is about youth and young adult, it's about everybody, right? There's a little child inside all of us that needs to be fed certain things, such as positive feedback, creative expression, honesty, trust. Make sure that you don't lie to the people you're serving. Say, you know what, I'm going to try to see if I can get you in this program. Not, oh, I'll get you in this program, and then you don't 5 months later, and they're like, now they don't trust you. Be honest. I know we got 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to scurry through. You all will get this PowerPoint, so it should be fine, hopefully. Make sure you're doing active listening. Make sure you amplify their voices. Amplify the voices of youth and young adults. Allow them the opportunity to speak up, whether it's through creative advocacy, whether it's through peer mentorship programs, advisory councils, having youth and young adult peer support specialists within your organizations, top to bottom, will help you be able to create programs and a system that is actually beneficial to the people that you are serving. So we want to make sure we build a better tomorrow. And we can do that by making sure we hold space. We want to hold space for everyone. Look, I know everybody's like, well, I just want a seat at the table. Well, there's not enough room. Get a bigger table. You got money for pizza every Friday. You got money for a bigger table, right? I love that. Oh, we're going to serve pizza to our workers on Friday. You know what? Just buy a bigger table so I can have a say in what kind of pizza you're getting. Because, you know, I'm not a fan of Pizza Hut. Anyway, that's me. I'm from Chicago. I got to think about pizza, y'all. Listen to understand. Stop listening to respond. So many times people hear what people are saying, but they're only hearing what they need to hear so they can give a beautiful response and one up the person who was speaking. Really? Listen to understand. Listen to gain an understanding of the individual. Ask questions. If we ask more questions, then we talk at the people we serve, we might find out what services are really needed in our organizations that will truly benefit everyone. Validate the emotions and experiences of the people that we serve. So many times I've heard people share their story and, oh, I don't believe a word they said. I would freeze because it would remind me of being a kid and how I wasn't believed. Understand trauma. Trauma can affect everybody, and it's important to practice cultural humility. It's also important to understand trauma-informed care. Do me a favor and Google trauma affirmative care, though. I don't have time. Sorry. Be open to creative solutions. The one thing about having a bigger table is that you get all these amazing ideas that you wouldn't have got because you had a bunch of people who look like you and thought like you and just yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, and yes, y'all to everybody. And that's not okay. So make sure you have diversity and make sure that will give you the creative solutions you need. Avoid minimizing, and please avoid playing the oppression Olympics. My goodness. I really wish I had more time to elaborate on the oppression Olympics, but this culture has had it more rougher than this culture, or this community has it harder than this community. Really, take the experience of the individual. You can fix the communities by working with individuals who can then go back and fix their own communities. Just saying. So here's some resources. Once again, please feel free to download my PowerPoint so you can have these resources. There's some references. Thank you. Feel free to email me. call me. Call me if you have any questions. I don't think we have time for any more questions. I'm so sorry.
Unfortunately, no. Thank you so much. That was, well, I needed that. Our audience seemed to need it. And I'm excited to move forward in my own work in crisis. So thank you, Vanessa. And I will turn it over to Ashley.
Hey there, everybody. Vanessa, I was just over here taking notes, writing stuff down like, oh, yes, good stuff. Thank you so much, y'all. You know, we like to do what's called read the feed. This is where we respond to a prompt from what we've heard from our incredible speakers. So before you leave for your break, we are going into a 30-minute break. But before you go, please go over to the event feed and respond to this prompt. In what ways can I offer support and validation to young adults who may be navigating trauma in their relationships? This is a prompt from the workbook that Vanessa put together, so make sure you download the workbook as well. I'll read that prompt again. We'll put it in the feed, but please respond. In what ways can I offer support and validation to young adults who may be navigating trauma in their relationships? Okay, again, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Mary. And thanks to everyone here. We're going into a 30-minute break, and we will see you all again very soon.
Bye.